So going back to our description of the subsystem methodology, you know that we are trying to learn subsystem methodology as it is practiced recently in 4 steps. The 4-step version of the design. In step 2, in step 1, we analyze the problem situation. We learn about the problem situation. There are several techniques that we can use. Analysis 1, 2, 3, etc. And then in step 2, again, we use many different instruments and techniques to produce something like this. It's an example of the purposeful activity model. That's the product of step 2. When we produce several such purposeful activity models, remember that the number of these will depend on how many different perceptions of the real world are in question in terms of the Weltanschauung of the different stakeholders, how they idealize the real world situation as a concept in their mind. This is a picture of one of those. There might be others. And then in step 3, we use these purposeful activity models to initiate a useful and formalized discussion, an effective discussion. Okay? This discussion is about what sort of changes are necessary to produce an improvement in this situation, as seen by different people according to different models. Each model being represented by such a diagram like this. So, step 3, we started this last week, let's repeat this. It's using the models to start a discussion about the situation and its improvement. Now, we know that discussions among professional people normally do not produce any effective results and they can end up in confusion. And worse than that, not only confusion, but they can be used as a pretext for different parties to further their own objectives and aims rather than the well-being or the improvement of the system as a whole. So for that purpose, I mean, to avoid this sort of dysfunctional discussion, we use these purposeful activity models so that we can structure the discussion and use these models as a source of questions to ask about the situation. Well, there's a warning here, if you read it again. The warning is that this step is usually known as comparison, but comparison of the, okay, what it says here, but this wording is dangerous, it stated to imply that the discussion focuses on deficiencies in the situation when you compare it against some sort of perfect idealized model example by the diagram, example in the diagram. That's not how you compare. Comparison means comparing the different perceptions of different people and about their ideas how to improve the situation. How do we do this comparison? As I said, we can produce a set of questions to ask. As an example, you can ask this question. Here is an activity in this model. You look at the diagram. Everybody looks at the purposeful activity diagram. There is an activity in that diagram. And then you can put a question such as, here is an activity in this model. Does it exist in the real situation? If it exists, who does it? Who executes this activity? How? When? Who else could do it? How else could it be done? Etc. So several such questions can be posed in respect of each of the activities. Or you can ask, for example, the question: this activity in the model is dependent upon these other 2 activities. You know, the arrows going from one activity into another activity. Okay? So if there's such an arrow, the previous activity has to come first. mean, the following activity depends on the previous activity. Is it like this in the real situation? You can ask, is it really like this in the real situation? So the questions can be about activities or the dependence of one activity upon another. Or actually the questions can be about the measures of performance by which the purposeful activity is judged. You remember, these measures of performance are sitting outside the large circle. These are usually known as the three E's: effectiveness, efficiency, and efficacy of criteria. Sometimes, in addition to those, you can add criteria about ethics, aesthetics, as we know. So you can also pose questions concerning those. What criteria will indicate the degree to which this activity or the set of operational activities is efficacious, efficient, and effective? What criteria can we use to answer these questions? This is usually a difficult question to answer. Finding criteria of efficacy, efficiency, etc. is not very easy because of the complexity of the situation, but it usually draws attention to the need for organized processes of monitoring. These three E's are sitting there for the purpose of monitoring the purpose of the activity system and seeing whether the criteria are being met by the activities. Otherwise, we learn through the feedback loop that something is missing and corrective action has to be taken. This is the whole point of the exercise, the learning exercise. Remember that SSM is a learning exercise. It's not a problem-solving exercise. It's a learning exercise about the situation itself, which therefore does not end at a point. Does not start. Well, it might start at a point, but it doesn't end. It goes on at a time. That we shall summarize a given model, a given purposeful activity model based upon a declared worldview to depend on some international organization. This might draw attention to other, usually implicit worldviews which may underline what is actually going on in the situation. This may serve to define other relevant models worth living. This is an important point. When you have a discussion about some purposeful activity model, about the activities themselves, about their interdependence, or about the criteria by which to judge them, these discussions sometimes bring out the fact that there are other Weltanschauungen which are hidden, which are not obvious at the moment. The discussion itself reveals that some people are viewing this situation somewhat differently. How do I mean differently? Not differently from each other, that's obvious, but differently from the models that they have proposed. Okay, the models, you have three purposeful activity models, but you can discover in the course of the discussions that these three models do not represent the only Weltanschauungen. There are other Weltanschauungen which are playing a role. So when you discover those, then maybe a new model might be constructed for this new form perception. So that's another use of these models. Well, how do we conduct these discussions? I mean, is it just an informal discussion, or are there any formal procedures that we can make use of to make these discussions effective? In practice, several ways of conducting the questioning of the situation have been developed. The first one is just a discussion. To a discussion about improving the situation in the presence of the models. This is completely informal and unstructured. This is possible. This will lead to some useful results because there are models. And the models formalize the discussion anyway. But there are other techniques. A more formal approach, this is most commonly used, is to create a chart matrix. You can create a matrix, such as this one. The model is sitting there at the top, and you are trying to put some questions. You can put the questions in a chart like this, in a piece of paper. You can prepare a matrix like that. as you can see on the first column at the left, there are some entities. These are activities and the dependencies that are shown in the model. You can write those activities and dependencies on the left-hand column, one after the other, in rows. And then in the other three columns are shown there, which are empty, but you can have as many columns as you need, of course. These columns are questions to be asked. Does it exist? How is it done? Who, by, when? How is it judged, etc. So each question sits on top of a column, and the answers are written in the columns, in the rows of the column. And at the end, you have a summary comment. You can make a comment which summarizes the answers produced to each of these questions. This is just an instrument that might be used in effectively used in coding. This is another picture of the same chart. It says, for example, you can first list the activities and then you can list the links. There are three activities, 1, 2, 3. Activity 2 depends on 1. Activity 4 depends on activities 2 and 3, etc. So these links are produced. And the questions, as you can see, can be placed at the top and the answers can be provided. In the comments or the summary column, you can discover new whats, new questions about what questions, or alternative how questions, etc. can be elicited, can be extracted from the answers provided to each question, and they can be recorded at the last. These comments will provide ideas about changes. Our whole purpose is to effect some sort of change that will end up in improvement of the knowledge. Another way of using the models is what we call producing or writing a scenario. What we mean by this is that the third way of using models to question reality is to use a model as a basis for writing an account of how some purposeful action would be done according to the model, and comparing this story or this scenario with a real-world account of something similar actually happening. So what you do here is you look at that model and then write a story about it. This story or this scenario tells us how this conceptual model might be acted upon in the real world. Writing a scenario, a screenplay. When you write it, then you can write and compare your story with what is actually taking place in the real world. It's another way of comparing. Whichever way the models are used to structure discussion, the aim is always the same. You can use scenarios, you can use just a discussion, you can use matrices, etc. Or you can produce your own instruments. That's also possible. But the aim is always the same. The aim is to find a version of the real situation and ways to improve it which different people with different worldviews can live with. Can at least live with. This is what we mean by accommodation. The idea is always to discover ways to improve the real-world situation. Another nice diagram, finding out about the problematical situation. The first phase of this is sitting at the top, in which you can use these pictures. Analysis 1, 2, 3. You can formulate that leads to model building with all the arrows. And you see that there are 4 models represented as sheets of paper. Those are the formal purposeful activity models. Relevant models of purposeful activity based on declared worldviews. If that would yield questions, these models, and questions to ask of the situation. These questions can be produced informally, just as a discussion, or by using question charts, or by using scenarios, etc. And proceed. These questions are asked of the perceived real-world problematical situation. And then that leads to a structured discussion about the change to improve the situation. So as a result of all of these efforts, we should end up by sitting around the table and making proposals for action, for change.
Basın pozmasılar yok. İsterseniz başlayalım.
We have to wait a few minutes. Maybe we can talk about whether you find this these subsystems approach is interesting or useful. Do you think they are interesting? I mean, they don't look like what they have been teaching you in industrial engineering or operational research. They're always talking about mathematical modeling and the hardware approach, in which this sort of start to a project is not mentioned at all with the use of but you can imagine that whatever problem that you are trying to attack, or whatever real-world situation that you face, it is suitable for hardware or not. Even if it is a very, very straightforward looking hardware case, like for example the IE398 project, it looks like a very hardware case. You can always treat the problem situation as if it is complicated or complex enough and it calls for a soft approach, and we can, for example, start with the first phase of SSM. In any real-world situation, you can do that. You can start with the first phase and produce a rich picture and conduct analysis 1, 2, 3. It will do no harm. I mean, even if the case is classic and traditional hardware, it will do no harm for you to start it as if it is a soft systems case. When you complete analysis 1, 2, 3, rich picture, etc., you will invariably, always have a better grasp of the problem situation. And then, if you discover that there are people who are viewing this problem situation in different ways, again, there's no harm in going over to step 2, where you ask people to construct their purposeful activity models. When these purposeful activity models are constructed and the discussion takes place, it may be possible that ideas converge. All the different parties converge on the same purposeful activity model, and the proposals for improvement may also be unified, may converge, which indicates that the case is in hardware. Then you can go on constructing your mathematical models and things like that. Do you understand this? This is a very powerful technique. It will be for your interest to remember my words in this course, okay? To keep the material of this course with you after you graduate and take jobs in the industry. administrator to remember all of this. And when you come up with a situation, go back to your books and lecture notes and remember how you can use these. This technique is very, very powerful. It will help you a lot and it will help you advance in your career. Very, very effective. So, let's try to go on. I think I should go offline when I'm using this. When you're not online, all sorts of interactions. Okay, that's where we stop, I think. So the last step is action to improve. How can we establish an action to improve? That's the last step of the SSM. Actually, we're not going to be able to present you any tools and techniques that you can use here. This is after the people sitting around the table to find out what to do. A consensus, as you know, is a rare special case among groups of people. And it usually occurs, if you have a consensus, it occurs only with respect to issues which are trivial or not contentious. Contentious means arguable, open to discussion. So consensus is not something we seek to achieve at all. SSM works with the idea of finding an accommodation among a group of people with a common concern, even though they have objectives and different worldviews. That is, they will have to find a version of the situation which they can all agree and live with. Relations between accommodations, consensus, and changes is again, we have a diagram. These diagrams are conceptually very useful and very useful. It says start here. There are two circles, as you can see. On the right circle, it says there's an arrow start here. Where we start is where we discuss possible changes in the problem situation. These possible changes that come up in the comparison stage, stage number 3, they imply some accommodations. And these accommodations will entail further possible changes. So there's a cyclical process that goes on in that. At the end of that, it yields, usually what it yields is an accommodation, a large ellipse or whatever, with large shape there is a set of accommodations in which there's a subset, which is labeled consensus. That consensus is always a very small subset. It's the occasional special case. I will not say that all consensus is about trivial things. It's not, it wouldn't be true to say that, but usually they are trivial. And if they are not trivial and an important issue, then right away you know that we have a hard war. If you have a consensus, it means that most likely it's a hard war. So the general cases, accommodations, and again, these accommodations are explored by the discussions. Again, there's an cyclical dependence. Seeking accommodation is by exploring possible changes and noting reactions to these changes. So some people sitting around the table will react to these possible changes. You propose some change, somebody else says, but if you do that, this and that will happen, and I don't like it. So more reactions. In doing this, it's best to think richly about change in human situations, separating the concept. Well, I told you that we don't have many instruments, but we have some useful concepts here. It is useful to separate the concept of change into 3 parts for analytical purposes. even though any significant change with all of these three. These three are the following. When we talk about change, what are we talking about exactly? We might be talking about a change in structure, or we might be talking about a change in process or procedures, or changing attitudes. So there are three elements of change, or there are three entities which might be subject to change. Structures, you can change structures, you can change processes, you are familiar with these two. Something we are not maybe very familiar is an attitude. Attitude in Turkish, what is it? I don't know the exact equivalent in Turkish. Tavır, tutum, savaş. Attitudes are difficult to change. Usually almost impossible. The easiest element to change is structure. Everybody understands what it means to change the structure. Changing the structure is, for example, changing by spending money, by investing, or by changing the rules. The rules are structured, as you remember. A rule doesn't change every day. So a structure is a slow changing entity. A rule, therefore, a procedure, a decision rule, for example, is a structural entity. So it is difficult. Everybody will understand what it implies if you make a change in structures. And it's also easy to arrive at a decision to change structural elements. But new structures usually require new processes and new attitudes, usually, on the part of those carrying out the processes or being affected by these processes. So it's much harder to think out the necessary new processes. Changing the new processes is not as easy as visualizing changes in structure. Visualizing changes in processes is often more complicated. And no one can be sure about what to do to change attitudes in a particular direction. Changing attitudes. I had in previous years a deeper discussion about attitudes. I remember reading the definition of attitude from social psychology, etc. But I won't use this. But you understand roughly that changing attitudes tavrını değiştirmen lazım, yoksa düşürmez, that's what another nice diagram. We have a problematical situation, and you would like to change its state, another state where it's an influence state. Persons are sitting over there or standing over there, looking at the situation. And as I said, wants these people to ask questions such as those. What combination of structural, process, and attitude change is needed? So the change in attitude are needed, structural processes are needed. Why are these changes might be desirable? How can these changes be achieved? What enabling action is also required? Do you understand this? Enabling action. Enabling action is, suppose we have decided to produce a change. Okay, we have decided, but implementing that change requires some resources and competences. These resources and competences that are required to produce the change must be enabled, must be provided. That's what we mean by enabling action. What sort of resources, capabilities are needed to effect this kind of change? And you have to provide these resources and competencies. Do you know what you mean by a resource? Do you know what a competence means? What do you mean by competence? Competency or competence? Or capability. We also teach strategy courses in our department. This is the subject matter of strategy course I teach. Strategy course, the Navy class. A resource is most likely, you know what it is. It could be a financial resource, physical resource, it could be a human resource, it could be intellectual resource. Many different types of resources like that. Intellectual resources are codified knowledge, like information provided in company reports, laboratory reports, etc. Inside which might be open or not open, etc. Those are resources. Now, competence is the way the knowledge and the ability to use these resources. It's called competence. If competence, if you develop your resources and competences, what we have is capability. These ideas are useful. So enabling action is required to produce capability. Let's go on. Who will take action? When? What criteria will judge the success or the lack of success, or that the action has been completed? What criteria are needed for us to do? So this diagram is a diagram of what is taking place when these people are sitting around that table. This is what they are doing. That's the end of the seven, the 4 steps of SSM. Shall I repeat it here? Step number 4 is action improving. Now, remembering these 4 steps, to sum up the entire SSM methodology, we present 7 principles that can be stated to underline the process, the methodology of SSM. These are numbered from 1 to 7. These are what we already know, but we are just reiterating them and summarizing and rounding up the entire description of SSM. Principle number 1. The idea of a real-world problem is replaced by the broader concept of real-world problematical situation. In SSM, of course, you can use any words you like. You can always say it's a problem situation, but what we have in mind is that it's a real-world problematical situation. There are no obvious problems. It's problematic. A problematic is a set of entangled and confused problems. It's a mess. We call a mess or echo of a mess. So problematical situation. That is a real situation which someone thinks needs attention and action. That's the first principle. The second principle, all thinking I'm talking about problematical situations will be conditioned by the Weltanschauung of the people doing the thinking and the talking. This German word is in the plural. The last E and N in German is like a plural. Weltanschauung is the worldly, Weltanschauung are the worldly views. These W's are the internalized, taken as given assumptions which cause us to see and interpret the world in a particular way. That's the second principle. The third principle is that every problematical situation will contain people trying to act purposefully. This means that models of purposeful activity can be used as devices to explore the qualities and characteristics of any problematical human situation. These are the purposeful activity models. Principle number 4, as you can see, these steps are roughly corresponding to the 4 steps. Discussion and debate about such a situation can be structured by using the models in principle number 3 as a source of questions to ask of the problem situation. So, principles I underlined in red, discussion and debate. Acting to improve a real-world situation entails finding, in the course of the discussions and debate in number 4, accommodations. Finding accommodations among different worldviews. Principle number 6. The inquiry created by principles 1 to 5 is a never-ending process of learning. We have mentioned this before. SSM does not have a clear ending, because whenever you affect or obtain some improvement in the problematical situation, you remember the flux of life flowing all the time? That will continue to flow, and the problematical situation may be improved, but it will change its shape, and there will always be more people with a purpose and acting and waiting for some, or intending for some action to change the problematical situation. So that the entire cycle will have to be completed. Learning is never finished. This is just learning, as I said. All soft system approaches are about learning. Learning is fundamental. Learning is fundamental to engineering. When we mention learning, what was the first concept you should remember? When I pronounce the word learning, what's the concept? This should be called your learning is almost the same as what? Feedback. These should be clear by now. I have been making these comments over and over again. Without feedback, we cannot learn. What sort of when you have feedback, okay, it means that there must be some error. The feedback is there to correct the error. Correcting the error is learning. What sort of errors are committed in this sort of cycle? What do you call these errors? Errors of commission. Errors of commission. We commit ourselves. To commit means üstlenmek, yapmak. When you commit yourself to something, when you do something, when you act, okay, the result of this, you may not like the result of your action. Huh? The feedback loop compares the result of your action with the 3 E's, the effectiveness, efficacy, efficiency, etc., and reports that they are not up to standard. The result of your action is not satisfactory. It's not effective, maybe it's not efficacious, maybe it's not efficient, maybe it's not elegant, maybe it's unethical. Okay? All those things. And then you take corrective action. The fact that you committed an error of commission in the first place was useful for you, because now, as a result of that, you have learned. Okay? Learning is feedback. Learning is not feedback, but learning does not happen without learning. Well, learning can happen, of course, in other ways also, but we're talking about a special type of learning. If I give you a textbook on mathematics, by studying the textbook, of course you can learn mathematics. That's not what we're talking about. Here we are talking about action, purposeful action, a real-world problematical situation. In this sort of situation, learning and taking the correct action is only possible after several failures and learning through feedback. What's the other type of error? Errors of omission. You remember Ekhoff? It's a very, very excellent article that Ekhoff. He tells us that the more pernicious, that is, the more harmful, the evil, the most dangerous errors are not the errors of omission, because they can lead to learning, but errors of omission. which are committed by all the managers all over the world, in every company, in every institution, in every university. People in charge are committing areas of pollution all the time. Why do they do this? Because they don't want to take risks. They don't want to appear stupid by committing an error. So they do nothing. They omit errors of pollution means making the error of doing nothing. Echo tells us in that article that this is the primary disease of management all over the world, especially in America. So this is an opportunity to remember those errors. Principle number 7, explicit organization of the process, which includes these principles 1 to 6, embodies a conscious, critical reflection about both the situation itself and also about the thinking about it. This is important. This principle number 7 is new in our lectures. It says that there's a 7th principle, and this is that we should reflect. Reflect, I have mentioned this, to think critically about what we're doing. Conscious, this critical reflection should be conscious, it should be deliberate. I mean, you shouldn't unconsciously reflect about your life, your girlfriend, your family, so that's something else. This is conscious and deliberate reflection about both the situation itself and also about the thinking about it, about SSM itself. This reflection, which leads to learning, must take place before, during, and after intervening in the situation. Note that principle 7 itself defines a 5th action. It's like an action. This thinking can be taken as an action. We have the 4 steps in SSM, you remember? This is like a step number 5, critical reflection. This 5th action is at a different level from the other 4. It's about the other 4. It is the activity which ensures that lessons learned are captured. Here is the final diagram of this lecture, which shows in the inner shape, inner circle, the 4 steps that we have learned now. And there's at the top sitting is the problematical of the situation. But now we have another step, which is sitting outside the reflective or critical reflection on the process, number 5. You see, you do the SSM, you try to improve the problematical situation, but at the same time, you think about the SSM itself and the problematical situation critically. And that's called reflection. And that reflection is also important. For example, that step number 5 is closely associated with the concept of a methodology. Why? Step number 5 makes SSM a methodology. Why? If we didn't have step number 5, SSM would be a method. It wouldn't be a methodology. Now, you know, when I make such comments and wait for your reactions, no reaction, I am really discouraged because I have repeated this, I don't know how many times. The difference between a method and a methodology. Methodology is when you have to modify and change the way you inquire at each step. That modification and change is only possible with step number 5 over there. Okay? Is this clear now?